So if I could have everybody's attention, please. We're going to start the Transportation Committee meeting. We have quorum in the room, and we're going to start away from the chair's seat because we have some ceremonial pieces to address this morning. So I'm just going to move over there with the vice chair, and we'll move on to dealing with the a very happy event, the Bruce Timmermans Awards. Good morning, everyone. Bienvenue à tous. May is Bike to Work Month, a time of year when the city promotes cycling as a fun and healthy part of the daily commute to and from work. It is an appropriate time to also honor others who help us achieve the goals that we set out in our 2013 Transportation Master Plan of increasing the cycling modal share from 3% to 5% of morning peak period trips, and to have cycling account for 8% of all trips in the downtown. Every year, we recognize the efforts of others for their outstanding contributions in Ottawa's cycling community through the Bruce Timmermans Awards. Bruce Timmermans was a longtime cycling educator and advocate, an active member of the Ottawa Bicycle Club, and a founding member of Citizens for Safe Cycling. We honor his legacy through the awards we are presenting here today. In fact, the awards that we are presenting this morning were created by Jason Commandant, who I'm going to ask to stand up. And Jason is the owner of Retro Rides on Spark Street. And he's done a very cool thing, and he's created the award this year from bike parts that once belonged to Bruce. So I think that's really neat, and thank you for doing that. This morning we are presenting one individual and one organizational award. I'll invite the recipients to come forward shortly to receive their awards. The individual award goes to Mr. Brian Smith. Brian has been cycling in the National Capital Region for many years, and since the summer of 2012, he has been writing a cycling blog, OttawaVeloUtaway.com. While documenting his rides across town and into the smaller villages surrounding Ottawa and Gatineau, he realized our city had many unknown shortcuts and routes that would benefit cyclists who are less familiar with safe cycling routes in the city. He came up with the idea to give travel advice through his blog posts. He asks residents for a destination they would like to bike to, then offers to scout out a safe route on their behalf, which he describes on his blog with turn-by-turn directions and photographs of key landmarks. In addition to offering a useful advice and service to other cyclists, his blog features architectural and historical areas of interest and guides residents on bike tours along historic sites, thereby promoting the region's rich cultural heritage. Brian's tours might introduce cyclists to historical figures such as architect James Strutt or business person Thomas Ahern. Cyclists have been able to discover the Nepean Bell and even Ottawa's collection of free roadside libraries. Beside his blog, now in its 6th year, Brian also designed a trailer for the Ottawa Tool Library, allowing the organization to attend events to promote the Tool Library. The Tool Library allows people to borrow hand tools, power tools, garden tools, and kitchen tools. This booth on wheels is a welcome addition to the outreach for the Tool Library and shows Brian's dedication to voluntary activities in the community. Brian encourages cycling in a very innovative way by nudging people to consider a bicycle to move around, as well as by tickling people's interest in our culture and history and offering up enjoyable ideas of exploring it on a bicycle. And I'm not sure if Brian has arrived. Brian has not arrived, so we're going to ask his ward councillor, Catherine McKenney, to accept, also the vice chair happens to be here, to come forward, which she has, to accept the presentation. And I'm actually supposed to give it to you, so I'm going to give it to you. Thank you. And this is the new award, so everybody can see it. Great job. Looks wonderful.
So that people can see it. It's almost rideable.
Almost right. This year, the organization award goes to Vélo Vanier. And among other things, Vélo Vanier operates a bike share program which loans bikes to the residents of Vanier. Its program is bilingual. It is headquartered in the heart of the Vanier community at the Centre des Services Communautaires Vanier. For the past 6 years, it has focused on bringing donors, borrowers, volunteers, and service agencies together to sustain its program. Vélo Vanier helps potential riders overcome barriers to cycling, whether it's a cost deterrent or simply being unsure if their commitment is serious enough to warrant buying a bicycle. Still others have no storage space for a bike over the winter months. Vélo Vanier helps to overcome these barriers by loaning bikes, locks, and helmets for a period of a month with an opportunity to renew. When Vélo Vanier loans out a bike, they take a picture of the borrower with the bike. The pictures are uploaded to an online photo album. The photos are laminated and displayed in the lobby of the community center over the summer and presented to the borrowers when they return the bikes. A collage of borrowers' photos is also used to promote the program the following year. The annual Vanier Vélo Fest brings community partners and residents out to celebrate cycling. Last year, 80 children participated in a safety rodeo, and 15 of those children borrowed bikes from Vélo Vanier to participate in the rodeo. Vélo Vanier is a success, in part because of the support it receives from the community, whether it's the community newspaper, the BIA, local politicians, or even individuals from the community who have donated bikes, parts, and labor. Vélo Vanier also organizes group bike outings, CAN bike training for safe cycling, maintenance workshops, and an Eyes on Vanier bike patrol initiative. Vélo Vanier has attracted applicants from Ottawa's Youth Futures, a program designed to prepare low-income high school students for full participation in post-secondary education and the workforce. It offers a 6-week placement to graduates of Youth Futures. Young employees have learned to fix bikes, serve the public, and use the administrative systems which support the program. While the focus of Vélo Vanier has been on offering the freedom and independence cycling brings to individuals, the fleet of 90 bicycles has become a community asset which has only begun to be exploited. In 2017, 117 individuals borrowed bikes. That's 40 more than in 2016. 60 children rode their bikes for the summer camp activities. 100 bike loans supported weekly outings for youth activity programs. 40 residents attended 3 outdoor bike maintenance workshops. 14 residents went on 2 community rides to Lac Leamy and to the Aviation Parkway. I'd like to invite Barra Tiam, community developer at the Vanier Community Service Center, and Roseanne Leonard, coordinator of Vélo Vanier, to come forward and accept the award. I'd also like Councillor Matt Fleury to join us for the presentation. We'll have to fix that for next year. That's on purpose. Jason. Jason, come on. So thank you to the recipients, and thank you to the judging panel and the staff that organize this every year, and thank you to all the community supporters who have either made the nominations or they're here to cheer on the lucky winners. So thanks very much, and we'll move over back to the real substantive piece of the or another way of saying the less exciting part of the meeting. Thanks very much. Councillor Chernyshenko just volunteered to make this an exciting meeting, so we'll wait to see what that means. I'm going to start off by something I think is a little bit exciting. One of the things that we struggle with in the city every winter is, of course, snow clearance, but also we all have catch basins on our streets, and when the melt happens, we want to get access to those catch basins. City staff go out and do the best that they can to get to them, but we often hear from residents saying, you know, we'd open that catch basin if we could access it, if we knew where it was, if we could find it. So I sat down with staff a couple of months ago and said, is there something that we can do about this? And staff very quickly got onto that. Steve Willis's group and Court Curry, I think is Court somewhere in the audience, group got onto this very quickly, and so we're happy to announce this morning that we've created an opportunity on our website. It's called the Catch Basin Locator Map. So all you need to do is punch in your address, a map will come up and will show you where the catch basins are in your area. So if we're having one of those really awful days when we've got rain and snow and everything else and you're worried about pooling water, again, staff will get out there as quickly as they can, but again, we often hear from residents saying, you know, we'd be happy to get to that catch basin, or we need to get to that catch basin, and the only indicators we have currently are yellow painted arrows on the road, which of course are now covered by ice and snow. So that doesn't help all that much at the time of year when we need it most. So this locator map is up and running, and hopefully we won't be having to use it for several months from now, but when winter hits again, this will be a useful tool, I think, for the city and the residents. And an email will be going out to all council members a little bit later today with all the links so they can share that with their residents and keep it ready for next winter. So we'll go on to the agenda now. So we have no regrets this morning, which is good because we have a very full agenda to deal with. We have no declarations of interest. Can we confirm the minutes of April the 4th, 2018? Thank you. We have communications as received. The first item on the agenda is the Parking Services 2017 Annual Report, and it's the Transportation Committee recommend that Council receive the Parking Services 2017 Annual Report. We have one public delegation on that, so we will hold that item. Number 2 is we have the Leitrim Road Alignment and Widening, River Road to Bank Street Environmental Assessment Study recommendations. And it's that the Transportation Committee recommend that Council approve the functional design for the Leitrim Road Realignment and Widening Environmental Assessment Study as described in this report, and supporting documents 1 through 6, and 2, direct Transportation Planning staff to finalize the environmental study report and proceed with its posting for a 30-day public review period in accordance with the Ontario Municipal Class Environmental Assessment process. We have a presentation on that, so we'll hold. Number 3 is the Canada Light Rail Transit Planning and Environmental Assessment Study, Moody Drive to Hazeldean Road recommendations. And we also have a staff presentation for that one, as well as some public delegations, so we'll hold that as well. That's followed by the Montreal Blair Road Transit Priority Corridor, St. Laurent Boulevard to Blair Station, Environmental Assessment Study Statement of Work. We do have a motion for this one, so what I would suggest is there are no speakers listed. We do not have a presentation, though staff are here to answer questions if need be. So we do have a question. Is it very short? Very short. Okay. Is anybody else going to have questions for staff on this? Okay, we'll allow the question now then, Councillor.
So I don't know who can answer this one, but this is for the transit priority corridor east of St. Laurent along Montreal Road, and I just want to confirm that the work of Angela and her team for the transit priority west of there, so in the Corps of Vanier, are aligned so that we actually align the corridor and ensure that it be bus stop location, that it be lane designation, that it be light, that everything be coordinated as part of this. I know it's the beginning of the review, but that all the work that was taken there is actually leveraged in this new phase.
Absolutely, Councillor.
Okay, seeing no other questions, Vivi, maybe stay there for a second if you could. There's a motion that is being brought on behalf of Councillor Nussbaum by Councillor McKenney. I'm wondering if you could introduce the motion. Perhaps we could deal with that now rather than holding the item.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of Councillor Nussbaum, whereas the secondary plan for the former Canadian Forces Base, CFB Rockcliffe, states that the vision for the development area, Wateridge Village, is of a contemporary mixed-use community that is walkable, cycling supportive, transit-oriented, and whereas the community design plan for the former CFB Rockcliffe indicates the possibility of access for transit, cyclists, and pedestrians through the National Research Council campus to access Blair Road, in addition to the planned transit access on Codds Road, and whereas both the secondary plan and the CDP were adopted by City Council in 2016, therefore be it resolved that the statement of work be expanded to include 1.2 kilometers of Blair Road north from Montreal Road so that the potential transit access through the NRC lands can connect to a transit priority corridor on Blair Road.
Thank you very much. I see Councillor Nussbaum's here to answer questions if need be. Are there any concerns, questions? Carried. Can we carry that?
Carried.
Okay, thank you.
And the items carried too?
Yeah, the whole.
And the items, yeah, the items carried as well. I think it is anyway. Everybody agrees? Perfect. Next is item number 5, status update, Transportation Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending the 25th of April 2018. Simply that we receive this report. Received? Thank you. Then we have a councillor's item from Councillor Fleury. Temporary road closure modification on Emont Street, that the Transportation Committee recommend to Council approve that the chain currently linking the planters installed as temporary road closure on Emont Street be replaced with an additional planter. Are we okay with that? Carried? Carried, thank you.
Thank you, Committee.
We also have a motion that we'll deal with at the end, which is we're going to be asking to be added to the agenda, and we also have a public delegation to speak to the matter if it is added to the agenda. So we will deal with that as the last item on the agenda. So we will go back to the first item that we held, which is the Parking Services Annual Report. Again, we have staff available to answer questions, but we do not have a presentation. And we're holding this because we have one public delegation, Trevor Hache, who's the Vice President of the Healthy Transportation Coalition. So if Mr. Hache is in the room, if you could come up and make your presentation.
You're not going to introduce the report?
Again, the report's been circulated and there isn't a presentation, but staff are available to answer questions.
Good morning, Chair Eglai and members of the committee. I read the report. I thought that it'd be introduced, so I apologize for not being prepared, but I think there's a number of things in it that are great and some things in it that are in need of some reconsideration moving forward and definitely some areas in need of improvement. I know that or at least I'm told, and it'd be great to have some clarity on when it is the reconsideration is going to be occurring related to giving business improvement areas in Ottawa essentially a veto over parking rates and the potential raising of parking rates. So it's my understanding in areas of Westboro and Hintonburg right now, BIAs are essentially stakeholders who are given essentially a veto over raising parking rates. I think that's problematic. You know, it doesn't really allow the City of Ottawa to use parking and the cost of parking as a tool to encourage more sustainable choices related to transportation. So that's one of my concerns, and it'd be great to have some clarity as to when the public can engage in that conversation with the city and the relevant stakeholders. One other thing I note in the report is that the hourly short-term on-street parking rates in Ottawa have not increased since the year 2008. Over that same period of time, transit fares have increased by 40%. And again, with regard to encouraging sustainable transportation choices, I think that's really an example where there are some silos that need to be broken down here at City Hall, certainly with regard to our thinking. So, you know, if we want to encourage people to make more sustainable transportation choices, which I believe is one of the sort of core goals of this committee, then we really need to look at the different pricing of the different modes of transportation. I also know that the parking revenue helps fund things like new parking lots. So in the Glebe, there was a parking lot that was built, I can't remember if it was in this term of council or the previous term of council, but my recollection was that it was worth tens of millions of dollars. And there are people within the affordable housing sector that see that as a real example of a missed opportunity. There has not been affordable housing built in the Glebe in quite some time, and in other cities they're co-locating affordable housing in city facilities such as parking lots. So I think going forward, the report doesn't mention any strategy around that, and it would be useful if some people that are responsible for talking about, you know, where are the next parking lots going to go that the city owns, we're thinking more strategically about those opportunities and taking advantage of them. And then I just wanted to voice support for a motion that was approved and originally moved by Chair Eglai related to Budget 2009 that's relevant to this report, which is using some of the revenue to locate ring and post bike racks at bus stops across the city. So it was quite a modest $30,000 pilot project, which is great. I think it would be wonderful if in Budget 2019 that was increased by 5 times, so that $150,000 was spent. And I understand that parking revenue has to balance out with expenditures, and so I think that's one of the ways that Ottawa could increase parking rates in some cases and encourage that more sustainable choice related to people biking to a bus stop and then getting on the bus. There's many, many bus stops across the city that have no safe bike parking or no bike parking at all, so I think it'd be great if that program were expanded. And then with regard to a little bit more creativity, and in the interest of, you know, advancing the idea of equity and inclusion in our city, I wonder if some of the parking revenues could be used to fund a pilot program that would allow low-income people to borrow bikes and use their Presto card. I know that part of the parking report, though we didn't really hear about it today, and I think it's underreported, is the fact that some of the parking revenue goes toward encouraging sustainable transportation choices. So there's a variety of great programs that the city's funding using its parking revenue. And I think that right now the bike sharing programs, besides Velo Vanier, which allows people to borrow the bikes for free, are quite expensive. So, you know, the commercial businesses that are running those bike sharing programs are costly. So it'd be great if the city could use some of that revenue to pilot a program that would allow people to use perhaps their Equipass Presto card to get access to a really inexpensive bike that they could take from an LRT station to their home and wherever they want on the NCC paths or what have you. So just want to encourage some innovative thinking going forward with regard to how to use the parking revenue, and want to encourage the city to increase parking rates as much as possible moving forward to encourage more sustainable transportation choices. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the delegation?
Question to staff.
Yep, I have some for staff as well, so I'll create a list then. Okay. So thank you. So I'll jump in here just to follow up a little bit on some of the issues raised, and I think Kevin, you're probably in the best position to answer some of these questions, or Scott, or both. Can you respond to the issue raised about when we will be doing a review of the parking policy, which allows veto not only to BIAs, but if I recall also to community associations and what have you. So can you talk a little bit about when we might be looking at that process?
Yes, Chair. We'll be, excuse me, we'll be tackling that in early 2019, so there will be fulsome public consultation at that time.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. The suggestion that some cities are somehow incorporating parking garages and affordable housing, again, I'm not sure who can answer this question, but, and possibly it's legal. The suggestion seemed to be that we'd be using some of the parking revenue generated to somehow pay for a portion of affordable housing. Is that something that we're even allowed to consider, or?
Mr. Chair, if that money is to be used for parking that would be available generally to the public, then the answer would be yes. If it's for another purpose, it would require further analysis, Mr. Chair.
So you're saying if it was a public parking lot attached to a low rental or a geared to income rental facility, that may be something the city could look at, or am I putting words in your mouth?
Mr. Chair, I'm saying as a legal matter, if the money is used to provide parking that is available to the public, then yes, parking revenue could be used towards that. If it's for another purpose, we'd have to look at it further, Mr. Chair.
I'm still not sure you're getting the question, though, and that may be I'm not asking it right. But the issue is not whether the parking lot should be built or not. If a parking lot is built that would allow anybody in the city to park there, as part of that project, adjacent to it, connected to it, could there also be some sort of affordable housing units attached to that construction project?
Mr. Chair, if I now understand the question that the parking revenue would be used towards affordable housing, it is not immediately obvious to me that that is possible. We can look at it.
If you could look at it, that would be great, and maybe circulate a memo in that regard. And then a similar question, another suggestion made was, could parking revenue be used to somehow subsidize a bike share or the rental of bikes at a lower rate than is currently there? We are going to be talking about bike sharing a fair bit at the end of this meeting, assuming that committee allows Councillor McKenney's item to be added. But is that sort of an area where you can mix and mingle?
So, Mr. Chair, I heard, if I may, I heard in the delegation's comments that, and I heard one other thing that I'd like to comment on. I thought the delegation also spoke about enhancing bicycle parking, and that is likely something that could be looked at as part of the bicycle revenue. With respect to providing bicycles themselves, again, that is a matter that I can't say as I sit here is legally possible. We can look at it.
Maybe you could wrap that into the same memo. Kevin wants to jump in here.
Yeah, Chair, sorry. The bike parking strategy will be definitely part of the parking strategy refresh. So we'll be looking at a wholesome program, an integrated program for bike parking.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Forey.
I just want to build on this. Do we know the jurisdiction for which some of the elements relating to housing were included, just so that the review can be accurate and fulsome. So maybe you could take it offline.
I'm sure Trevor would be happy to share that with staff.
I think it's important to have an accurate review as to which jurisdiction, if it is on Ontario, which measures they've used. I want to speak to two of the elements. One, which is the reserve funds that we have. So I believe in the report it speaks to around $22 million in that reserve fund. Maybe we can hear from staff as to if those funds are allocated currently, and if not, how do we plan to build some funding strategy relating to that?
Chair, the councillor is correct that we do have approximately a balance of $22 million in the parking reserve fund. On a year-to-year basis, a portion of that is allocated towards life cycle and other capital requirements as part of the program. The spending is largely predicated on opportunity and technologies that come up. We are, as a point of reference, and the delegation made this reference, the last large expenditure was for the Glebe Garage, which was in the neighborhood of $10 million. So we need to have available funds in order to accommodate opportunities as they arise. Beyond parking facilities, though, we're looking at things such as a smart city technology and different investments that will allow us to develop the program and achieve our mandate.
Okay, and the strategy itself, are we able to spend funds? I know that some of my colleagues relating to park and rides are very busy, some are overpopulated, so I want to know, are we able to use some of those reserve funds to increase some of those park and rides opportunity?
Chair, we actually over the last couple of years, there has been funding provided to OC Transport for the maintenance of the park and rides. And in terms of the additional construction, I will have to defer.
Mr. Chair, I think a lot of these questions have a common theme. You're asking whether or not parking revenues can be directed to other city initiatives, everything from additional park and rides, which link to the Transit Reserve Fund, and into other areas, development and housing and so forth. And I would remind members of the committee that I believe the Treasurer issued a memo with Mr. Wiley just before budget on some of these matters. I think the Chair has an excellent idea that you need to have a wholesome review back with Ms. Similak as to what the reserve fund can and cannot be used for. I was around when that reserve fund got established. It was very prescriptive. And then back to what Mr. Wiley talks about in terms of the refresh. So I think Mr. Mark is correct that you should probably direct staff to take this away from a financial perspective as to what exactly the reserve fund can and cannot be used for currently. And then you can have a wholesome discussion, I believe, next term of council as to where you want to change that policy, if in fact you want to. My recollection of it, it's been a few years since I've been to it, been involved with it, is that it was very prescriptive. That doesn't mean that committee and council can't change the reserve, the parking reserve. And again, I just want Mr. Mark to comment on that from a governance perspective. I believe you need a council direction on that, and I don't know exactly the mechanics of that. Mr. Mark, maybe you want to confirm in terms of the comments I just made.
Mr. Chair, I certainly concur in the approach that the General Manager has identified, that there is a need for a fulsome review if committee and council are inclined to go down this path.
So I'm
sorry, I didn't hear could you?
So what he said was he concurs with Mr. Manconi as to the approach. I guess just the procedural part though, Tim, if you can help us, do we give you a direction here at committee, or do we wait and give you a direction at council, or both?
Direction here would be fine, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so if the clerk can do a direction along the lines of what Mr. Manconi has suggested, and then Mr. Mark can work with that through the governance process. Thank you. Councillor Ford, do you have further questions?
My last comment, Mr. Chair. Parking is important. The entire transportation network is important, but those missing links of how do we support transit, how do we support alternative options, how do we ensure that we get development out of the surface lots downtown? I mean, that's core to some of the taxation discussions that we had recently. I don't know that it's a perfect model, but it appears that the other big city in Ontario, Toronto, which has gone forward with a parking authority, has actually unlocked some interesting component of the Municipal Act. So sure, we can't tax, but if we have a non-for-profit authority that captures and manages the program, there's some opportunity, or what appears to be some opportunity, to fund these and to bring in some of those initiatives. So I'm not asking for a staff comment, but I hope that as part of the review, I believe it's in 2019, that all those metrics and measures will look at it, because I'm actually not blaming Scott and his team. I think they're doing what they can within the authority we're giving them, but all of council kind of sees opportunities elsewhere, and it'd be nice to strategize and to bring forward a holistic review so that we can unlock that potential.
Yeah, Chair, governance will be part of the strategy refresh.
Thank you.
Very much. Councillor Deans.
Yeah, I think pretty much what I wanted to suggest is covered, but so just to understand then, the first thing based on the direction from this committee is that at the start of the next term, governance will entertain the idea of broadening beyond covering all the operating and capital costs associated with parking, broadening what we might be able to use those revenues for. And then that will be followed by a refresh where staff will put suggestions before the committee. Will you go through public consultation?
Yes, Chair, we will.
Okay, and then that will come back, because I thought the delegation offered some great innovative ideas that all should be considered during that refresh. And I really like that idea of having bikes to borrow at transit stations affordable for everyone that might want to use them. And I don't know if that's something that you could look at making a partnership with a bike share company that's already doing that, or if OC Transpo could take that on related to their own business. But I think it's a really good idea and one that we should pursue. So if you could just pursue that as part of the refresh of the plan, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Deans. One of the nice things is I know there's representatives from the various bike share companies also in the audience, so that's maybe something that they want to think about or have some ideas about as well. Councillor Chernyshenko.
Yes, thank you. I do want to thank Trevor Hache for raising a number of interesting points. I'll offer an answer, I suppose, to something that he raised, but before that, simply say I certainly take the critique, if you will, very seriously, that at a certain point, if our parking rates do not keep up with, at a minimum, increases in public transit or costs of other forms of transportation, then in effect we're undermining our own efforts. If either there continue to be free parking in certain popular districts or relatively cheap parking, then we will simply be adding to congestion that we're trying to already pay for by adding transit. So it's a tricky balance, because you don't ever want to hit the point where nobody comes down by car ever for anything. We know that plenty of merchants rely on sales of bulky items and other things and family visits, but that we should slip far below that, I think, is essential. We not allow that to happen, and investigate dynamic parking prices to help address congestion problems. Similarly, this has already been picked up by several of my colleagues, the idea of the availability of bike share or some sort of affordable bikes, readily accessible ones, as part of a comprehensive network. The point that was raised, though, that I want to help to answer was that of using parking garages in combination with something like affordable housing. And the Glebe garage, which was the most recent, in fact the only municipal garage, to my recollection, built in perhaps even the last decade or quite a while, we look quite seriously at whether affordable housing or some form of rental housing might be part of that project. But what we had to do was look at the genesis of that project in the first place. It came out of the fact and the fear that all of the new visits to the district, because of the redevelopment of Lansdowne, was going to make impossible what was already a very tight parking parking supply. So in fact, the goal of the project was to increase parking supply, not for Lansdowne, but for all of the other businesses that needed it to survive. And that's why its location further north was part of that. And its initial rules and pricing were such that it was actually saying to the Lansdowne event goer, you know, don't come here and park because you can't stay as long as the game lasts anyway, because actually this garage wasn't built for you. It was built to help, you know, the other businesses thrive. Knowing that, what we realized was with the maximum zoning height of 4 stories, if we were to use a number of those allowable stories for housing, there was already a 1-story or a surface parking lot with 55 spaces. In order to add parking supply and add additional units, we were going to end up with a 10-story building in a 4-story zone, and possibly have to go deep underground in an area that wasn't suitable for that either. So in the end, the conclusion was that it wasn't viable in this space, not that it should never be explored or would never be viable, but here on a traditional main street where we wanted to keep the heights low, we would have built a building with affordable housing and ended up with no more parking space than we started with, which would have just undermined the goal. So I hope that's not too confusing a long answer for you, but it was looked at, and I think it should be looked at. It just didn't work here. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, not confusing at all. Helpful, actually. Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the issue of, you know, co-location with parking, I just want to remind folks that it has been done successfully in 2 instances that I know of, one on Clarence and obviously in my ward on Gloucester, where CCOC actually built above parking. And while I'm not sure that parking garages are something we're still looking at in the downtown, certainly not in the ward that I represent, but it can be done. And when we're, you know, looking, when we're building out and even looking at our light rail stations, I think that you know, as I look at the ones that have been built so far, I think it is a missed opportunity that we didn't build housing above those light rail stations. So it's something I'm going to bring up a little later whenever we talk to item 3, but just a reminder that we can do it successfully. It's where housing should go, and we need to keep that in mind.
Thank you. Anybody else wishes to speak to the report? Received? Received. Thank you. Next, we have the Leitrim Road realignment and widening environmental assessment study from River Road to Bank Street, and we have a staff presentation for this. And we also have nope, just a staff presentation. Then we had some correspondence that was circulated, but we have no delegations registered to speak. So Vivi, who will be leading the presentation then? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Next to me is Katerina Svetkovic, who is our city project manager on this file, and beside her is Ron Clark with Parsons. So Ms. Svetkovic will be giving the presentation.
Good morning. Thank you, Vivi. This presentation summarizes the recommendations of the environmental assessment study for Leitrim Road realignment and widening between River Road and Bank Street. Today, Leitrim Road is a 2-lane east-west arterial road south of the airport that connects to several north-south arterial roads, including River Road, Limebank and Albion Roads, and Bank Street. Leitrim Road also crosses the future Trillium Line LRT corridor. A portion of the existing Leitrim Road needs to be closed and realigned in 20 to 25 years due to the Ottawa International Airport Authority's plan to add a new southern runway. The future runway would be located on top of the existing Leitrim Road, as shown in pink on the map. The city's transportation master plan also identifies the need to widen certain sections of Leitrim Road to support planned growth in adjacent communities. Although the timing for both the realignment and widening is beyond 2031, there is a need to complete the planning and functional design now to establish the future right-of-way requirements, protect the road corridor from encroaching development, and inform the planning and development of adjacent lands. This is also an opportunity to reimagine Leitrim Road, design it as a complete street that serves all modes of transportation, and integrate it with the Leitrim LRT station. The EA study's recommended plan is to realign Leitrim Road as a 4-lane undivided arterial serving adjacent communities. It will include new roundabouts and signalized intersections with protected intersection design. The recommended alignment is shown in black on this map. The new realigned and widened Leitrim Road will pass through urban and rural lands. On the map, future employment land use is depicted in blue, residential in yellow, the NCC Greenbelt, and the airport lands in gray. The recommended plan considered these adjacent land uses and future development plans. The plan also strived to minimize impacts on the natural environment. In addition to the realignment and widening, the non-essential sections of the existing Leitrim Road will be closed in the future, as shown in red X's on the map. The ownership and use of these closed sections will be determined in consultation with surrounding landowners and in conformity with future area plans. The majority of Leitrim Road will be widened to 4 lanes, except for the existing section of Leitrim between River Road and Limebank, shown in solid red. This section does not need to be widened, so the road will remain as 2 lanes. A multi-use pathway will be added on the south side. A new single-lane roundabout will be built at River Road. The Leitrim Road realignment west of Limebank Road will depend on the future development of adjacent employment lands. The recommended plan will protect for 4 lanes in case they are required in the future. The next few slides will show the specific design features of the recommended plan. This is an example of the recommended urban cross-section for the realigned and widened Leitrim Road. This complete street design will be applied to most of the recommended corridor in Riverside South and Leitrim communities, as shown in solid red in the top map, with residential and/or employment lands on both sides of the roadway. Key elements are new 4 lanes, undivided with curbs on both sides, and a new sidewalk and segregated and raised cycle track on both sides. Next is an example of a road segment with both urban and rural cross-sections. The segment is shown in solid red. On the north side, along the airport business park, there will be a curb and a multi-use pathway. On the south side, along the greenbelt, there will be a drainage ditch and a multi-use pathway. Next is an example of a rural cross-section along both sides of the road adjacent to the greenbelt as well as industrial lands. Key elements include a drainage ditch and a multi-use pathway on both sides of the road. The recommended plan also includes a grade-separated Leitrim Road over the Trillium line. The cross-section of the overpass is shown here. A multi-use pathway will be provided on both sides and will be separated by a physical barrier from general traffic. And finally, you have seen this cross-section earlier for a segment that requires a combination of a rural and urban cross-section. This particular cross-section will apply to the segment shown in red. On the north side, along the greenbelt, there will be a paved shoulder and a drainage ditch. And then on the south side, along the residential development, there will be a curb and a multi-use pathway. In addition to enabling the airport's plan for a new runway, the key benefits of the recommended plan are that it protects the corridor from encroaching development and it informs the development of adjacent lands. It identifies a complete street and a multimodal connection to Leitrim Station with accessible design applied throughout. It guides the future municipal infrastructure network and it maintains east-west connectivity. The realigned and widened Leitrim Road will travel next to and through the Greenbelt. Natural landscapes include the Greenbelt forest edge and the Greenbelt agricultural lands. Built into the recommended plan are measures to minimize the environmental impacts and integrate with the surrounding landscape, including rehabilitation and naturalization of adjacent lands and features, and incorporating low-impact design for stormwater management and the use of enhanced grass swales along the rural cross-sections. The use of Greenbelt lands will be compensated using the no net loss and net environmental gain principle, which will be determined at the detailed design stage. In addition, crossings are recommended at key ecological linkages. These ecological crossings will enable the flow of water and passage of small animals under the road and pathways. Directional fencing will be provided where appropriate. Consultation was a significant component of this EA study. A broad range of stakeholders was engaged, including the Airport Authority, Transport Canada, and the National Capital Commission. They were consulted not only on the recommended plan, but also on the 11 alternative corridor alignments that were initially considered. Overall, consultation included 2 rounds of meetings with agency, business, and public consultation groups that included representatives from the Accessibility Advisory Committee, 2 open houses, numerous additional meetings with individual stakeholders, project website that provided easy access to information. First Nations were also invited to our meetings and to provide feedback. No comments or questions were received. This slide summarizes a few key consultation outcomes. The figure on the left shows the recommended corridor that is strategically located to serve employment lands in Riverside South. This alignment resulted from consultation with area developers who recognized the alignment's long-term benefit to future employment uses. Next, some residents in the Findlay Creek community were concerned about potential noise impacts from the realigned roadway. The figure on the right shows that the nearest noise-sensitive receivers are approximately 160 meters from the planned road. Based on this distance and the forecasted noise levels, the study experts concluded that noise attenuation is not required. As communities develop, future residential developments will be required to assess noise levels and provide the necessary mitigation measures if needed. Overall, feedback received through consultation was supportive of the project. Some advocated for road widening and improvements to pedestrian and cycling facilities to occur sooner, prior to 2031. The preliminary cost estimate for design, construction, property, and contingencies is $86 million in 2018 dollars. As this project is not planned until sometime after 2031, the source of funding has not yet been identified. The realignment is not needed until the airport implements its new route, potentially 20 to 25 years from now. In the future, the city may wish to seek cost-sharing arrangements with the Airport Authority because the road realignment is required due to their planned runway. Segments of the new complete street could be built sooner in conjunction with the adjacent development. Until then, the city will maintain its existing Leitrim Road. The city will also utilize opportunities from near future projects to add capacity to key intersections and enhance pedestrian and cycling facilities. The next steps are to finalize the environmental study report in May of this year, release the report for a 30-day public review in June, and complete the study in July of this year. Once approved, the recommended plan will inform current and future community design plans and related land use and transportation infrastructure decisions. The recommended plan will also help facilitate negotiations for land transfers and leases with Transport Canada, the Airport Authority, and the National Capital Commission. Mr. Chair, that concludes my...
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the delegation? Not for the delegation, but for staff. Okay, Councillor Kakish, Councillor Deans.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation and all the work that you've done with our stakeholders in the area as well. One of the things, and you touched on it in the presentation, is more for communications, I guess, when we talk about this, because in some cases, when people see we're doing an EA, they think we're ready to go for it soon. So I think we need to be extra clear in communicating that this is being done or triggered as a result of development and protecting the corridor for the airport, because a lot of people, when they hear of an EA, they're thinking we're going to widen in the next couple of years, and obviously that's not the case, at least not at this point. There may be some other opportunities in the future, perhaps once we discuss the TMP and open that and down the road. The other thing I wanted to ask you about as well is, and I know we've had these discussions in our meetings as well, but there's a lot going on in this area tomorrow. You know, the casino's going to Hard Rock, LRT, the intersection modifications at Leitrim and Albion. And I just want to make sure that between you guys and the other people that are working on other files, everybody's on the same page and everyone's sort of looking at the bigger picture in terms of what's happening with LRT, the intersection modifications at Leitrim and Albion, and all the work that's happening there in terms of infrastructure.
Yes, Chair, it's all, we're working all together as a team on every aspect of this project and the developments in the area.
Okay. And I see that we don't have any public delegation, so I assume you've done a good job of keeping everyone happy, although I see Pierre Dufresne here as well in the audience. Have all the issues been resolved in terms of, you know, I know Honey Gables, for example, has about the stretch from River to Lime Bank and keeping that to 2 lanes instead of 4. I think you've addressed that here. In terms of the landowners in Leitrim, whether it's in the industrial park or in the development area, have all those issues been resolved to, you know, the majority's satisfaction?
Yes, Chair, we've met with everybody who's issues with us or submitted emails or letters, and we are confident that all the issues have been resolved or that steps to continue working together.
Okay. And realistically, with everything that's happening in terms of development area, when is our next opportunity to talk about potentially moving streets or roads like Albion, Leitrim, Bank, etc., moving them forward? Is it strictly going to be in the next round of TMPs? Is it going to be when we open the DC bylaw? When is the opportunity or timing for us to potentially advance the timelines that we see before us today?
Chair, some of these issues are dealt with right now with developers and possibly front-ending agreements, other larger components. So we still are working within the framework of the Transportation Master Plan, the current one, and the affordability model. So you're asking questions if visiting these issues would all be part of the next update and review.
Okay. Yeah. And so every time we talk about that, I hear different timelines in opening up the DC bylaw and opening up the TMP. What exactly is our time frame on those discussions? I know it's in the next term of council, but when exactly?
I think Mr. Manconi might be in a better position to answer the global question about the TMP.
Yes, so that question has come up in many forums, and what I tell everybody, the first thing that needs to occur is the LRT needs to launch, and then the entire transportation system will change significantly, and it'll take virtually a year to collect all the data to see how the transportation system has changed in all modes. So that gets to sometime in late 2019. So the detailed work would start sometime in 2020. The caveat on that is council needs to, when Mr. Kanellakis brings forward the next term of council priorities to council, you will decide what the timing is on that, the scope and scale of that. The only thing staff will do is some background work right now, because the detailed work about what the impact of the LRT is and on all modes can't start until we launch. So I've cautioned everybody that any of the detailed work won't commence until 2020.
And so what about the DC bylaw? I hear things about opening up the DC bylaw. Where does that fit in with the TMP discussions that will be happening next term?
So Mr. Willis and I are in lockstep in terms of all political things that need to be brought forward, the DC bylaw, the official plan, and so forth. So again, that will all be coming to you as next term council in terms of priorities and the staging and the sequencing. And as per Mr. Kanellakis' direction, the only thing we're doing right now is work that feeds into the overall process.
Okay, because I know, and you know, we've been talking with my South End colleagues about opportunities with the developers and others as part of everything that's happening in that part of the neighborhood. And one of the situations that we've been facing is that in some cases there are, you know, private developers who are prepared to help out with front ending, but we seem to always say no because of the payback period or the DC bylaw or what's in the TMP. So it's a bit of a frustration that we don't have the flexibility to play around with those things. And so I think at the earliest opportunity where we can do that, it would be helpful for us to be able to agree on some of those projects.
Absolutely, Councillor. I think the other thing that you do need to keep in mind is affordability. And so here staff say not possible. I like to say we don't say no. We do explore every opportunity, including with the development community, as you know, because I've been part of those discussions. We do have to overlay your affordability plan on every suggestion that's brought forward. So again, Ms. Similak and Mr. Kanellakis have that in terms of what we bring forward in terms of the affordability review. You've approved the transit affordability plan, and you know where you stand on that. So all those things get put into the hopper, and there's a lot of complex policy things that will be.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank Katerina as well, because she's been doing a great job informing our local stakeholders and community associations as well. So thank you for your work on this file. Ron, of course, you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Deans.
Thank you. Well, overall, let me just say I support the new alignment and the widening plans for Leitrim Road, and I'm also very pleased to see that the realigned Leitrim is being made into a complete street. I think that's great, and I wanted to thank the staff who were very consultative the process, and I appreciated that. So I think it's, generally speaking, a really good project. I just wanted to ask a question I had asked in my office, but I just wanted to ask it in the public forum because Councillor Kakish and I both have lots of residents on River Road that are not happy with the increased volumes of traffic on River Road. And as we all know, we spent millions of dollars widening Limebank to be the main north-south arterial to carry heavy volumes. But that small segment of Leitrim between River and Limebank is a very convenient shortcut. It shaves a few seconds off a trip by going upriver instead of staying on Limebank. And I know that piece of road doesn't have any entrance driveways onto it, and I just wonder if it's even necessary to maintain it in the plan, or if we could just eliminate that and thereby encourage traffic not to shortcut through there and use River Road when we really intended the high volumes of traffic to be on Limebank. You might want to put that map up. It might be easier to imagine.
Chair, we are making every effort not to make that connection over to River Road attractive for traffic, and as such we're leaving it as 2 lanes. When Leitrim is widened and the connection will be up to Limebank, that will become a very obvious route to take. Now, your question was about removing that link. We can't do it as part of this project. We would have to analyze what that would be done, or what that would do to the whole network, and that would be something for a broader review MP when we're looking at the whole network of both transit and roads.
Okay, and that would involve considering that sometime in the future there will be a connection over the river at that location. But if when you update it, they don't need that connection to go over the river, then they really don't need that piece of road either, right?
It's premature to come to that conclusion, but that all those things come into play. If we don't need a piece of infrastructure, then there's no need to maintain it.
Right.
And you're right, it is, sorry, I think it's the other slide. That one that you're talking about, the future with the dash red lines at the top left corner. That's another project in the transportation master plan. It's way, way off into the future. That's why it's dashed. So that will have an impact on any analysis that we will do on the overall network.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Deans. Councillor DeRose.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Karina, for a great presentation. I know I attended most of the public consultation. You did a good job, and that's why we don't have public delegation. So you did collaborate very well with the community association. Thank you for you and your team for that. My question is for Mr. Manconi concerning the MP. I know you answered Councillor Kakish about few. You're going to wait 1 year to collect the data from after we open the LRT, so we can. I understand that, but the LRT really, I know the TMP, it's a citywide, and the LRT really, it's going to give you data between east and west. So I don't understand really what the difference is going to make for the south end. Also in the TMP in 2013, where the south end got short-ended and we took the money, we moved money from Earl Armstrong to Prince of Wales. So I think this next council, we need to make sure we open the TMP as soon as possible to review and making sure that the DC charges apply to where they belong. So can you collaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's a great question because it's come up again in some other meetings I've attended. I can assure you that the opening of the LRT, even though it's directionally east and west, it will impact every direction of the city and in every mode. I had someone suggesting the other night at a public meeting that we don't take into account movements from our Gatineau partners. We do. Ms. Chi and her team look at the model across the entire city from all directions and all modes, and it will have an impact. And it could be positive or it could stress some roads and so forth. With respect to your question about funding and shifts and so forth, I understand the comment. I am very sensitive to it, and I think it fits into that hopper about affordability and about setting some priorities. And I know Mr. Kanalakis is discussing with you right now priorities and so forth. And I can assure you that myself and Mr. Willis have relayed that every single councillor that I've met with is talking to me about the TMP and about how we can do more. And I think that's great, but those things cost money, so affordability has to be overlaid on top of that. The priorities that you currently have in motion need to be overlaid on that. Other levels of funding from provincial and federal partners and so forth, the DC bylaw and the official plan. So there's a lot of inputs into that, and I think some of that work, to your point, can start right away, but they're all interconnected, so it's a very complex matrix.
No, and I really appreciate it, and I'm not trying to make a comment, but what I'm saying is we need to really consider all these, because what happened, our residents need answers. And we keep telling them, oh, we're waiting for this. So I understand there is affordability, and I do get it. But the problem is, if we're going to wait 10 years to have a TMP, that's not answered for our residents and to our communities. That's the point I'm trying to make.
I agree with you 100%. And every councillor is saying the exact same thing to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And just to be clear, I don't think, I thank Mr. Manconi. He brings a cold dose of reality to our proceedings from time to time, but that's appreciated. But I don't think he suggested that we're looking at a 10-year timeline. I know you don't like to be, held to a date on things. We know that for sure. But maybe you can clarify. I don't think you're suggesting a 10-year window before we get to the next TMP.
No, I am not. What I am saying is that, you know, council can direct staff to do whatever we need to on the TMP, but I'm managing expectations because I don't want you to go into this thinking we can start doing the detailed work right away on the TMP, because we cannot until we open up the LRT and stabilize the network and get that data. So it's just about managing expectations.
Okay, thank you for that. Any more questions, Councillor Drewes? No, Councillor Quadri.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. If you can take the slides back to the one that Councillor Deans was speaking to. Yeah, that one. The gray area, or the gray connectivity to the red line, you had mentioned in your presentation about something about funding, or not sorry funding, but about the fact that that land belongs to the airport authority. Is my ears hearing correctly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. West of Line Bank, where we are proposing to protect the corridor for realignment of Leitrim Road, that land primarily belongs to Urbandale and Ridgecraft, to the Riverside South Development Corporation, with also a small segment, I believe, to the NCC. So one of the reasons we are recommending to protect that corridor, the realigned corridor west of Line Bank, is for future access and servicing of these employment lands.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I don't have anybody else on the list. Is there anybody else who wants to speak to this matter? Okay. Seeing no one, on the report, carried? Carried. Thank you. The next item is item number 3, Canada Light Rail Transit Planning Environmental Assessment Study, Moody Drive to Hazeldean Road. Recommendations, and again we have a staff presentation. I'd ask you to hold your questions though, because we have six public delegations to speak to the matter after the presentation. Sorry, I've just been correct. We have 7 public delegations to speak to the matter. Phoebe, I'll turn it over to your team.
Thank you, Chair. We're very happy to be here today to present to you the recommendations of the Canada Light Rail Transit EA study. There are lots of issues in this project, but we've resolved them. It's a complicated project as well, and this project, I mean, as with every project, there is one element that makes it different from all the others, and in this particular case, it's about corridor selection. With that, I'd like to introduce you to the team here. Angela Taylor is the city's project manager managing this project, and beside her is Paul Croft, our consultant from Parsons, who assisted us. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Ms. Chi. Today's presentation is on the recommendations for the Canada Light Rail Transit extension between Moody and Hazeldean Station. This presentation starts with the recommended plan for the Canada LRT. This project begins at Moody Station, here shown to the right, with a light maintenance and storage facility just west of the station. The station and maintenance facility received environmental